So, what if everything you thought you knew about money, what if everything your parents taught you, was actually holding you back? Today, we're going to dive deep into the huge mindset shift from one of the most famous personal finance books out there, Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it all kicks off with a really simple but super powerful story. You see, this one idea, it's the bedrock of the entire book. The author, Robert Kiyosaki, well, he grew up with two very different father figures, and they had completely opposite takes on money. He figured out pretty fast that this wasn't just about picking which mentor to listen to. No, this was about choosing a whole different destiny.
So, who were these two dads? Well, one was his actual dad, who he calls his poor dad. The other was his best friend's father, his rich dad. And here's the thing. Both were smart guys, both were successful, pulling in good money, but one of them died with a pile of bills to pay, while the other became one of the wealthiest men in Hawaii. How does that happen? What was the difference?
Okay, and this is where it gets really counterintuitive. The poor dad, he was a brilliant academic, had a PhD and everything. The rich dad, he didn't even make it through 8th grade. I mean, based on that alone, you'd think you know who comes out on top, right? But nope, the results were completely flipped. One left debt, the other left an empire. And that puzzle, that paradox, that's exactly what this book tries to unravel.
Now, let's be super clear here. This isn't some good guy versus bad guy story. Both of these men were strong, successful guys who really, truly believed in education. The crucial difference, the thing that split their paths, was what they believed you should be studying. And that one little fork in the road, while it changed absolutely everything. And you know, it turns out having these two clashing mentors was actually a massive advantage. It forced Kiyosaki to really think for himself. He couldn't just sit back and accept what one of them said. Nope, he had to constantly compare, question, and then choose his own path. And the book makes a huge point about this. That process of actively thinking about money is way more valuable than any single tip or trick you could ever learn.
All right, so let's get into the actual advice they dished out, because this is where the fireworks really start. We're not talking about little disagreements here. We're talking about completely opposite philosophies on how money and the world really work.
I mean, talk about a head-on collision, right? One dad says, the love of money is the root of all evil. The other says, no, the lack of money is the root of all evil. One mindset sees having wealth as a moral problem, while the other sees poverty as the real source of society's issues. Where you stand on that one question pretty much dictates every single financial move you'll ever make.
And this perfectly sums up the employee versus the owner mindset. Poor dad's advice is what? Let's be honest, most of us here our whole lives. Study hard so you can find a good company to work for. But rich dad, he just flips it right on its head. Study hard so you can find a good company to buy. See the difference? One path is about climbing the corporate ladder. The other is about owning the ladder itself.
Okay, and when it came to risk, again, total opposites. It was basically fear versus education. Poor dad's advice was, play it safe. Don't take any risks. But of course, that usually means you miss out on opportunities too. Rich dad said something totally different. Don't avoid risk. Learn how to manage it. His whole point wasn't about being reckless. It was about getting smart enough to understand the game and turn that risk into a real reward.
All right, now this might just be the most controversial idea in the entire book. Poor Dad said what we've all been told a million times. Our home is our biggest investment, our greatest asset. But Rich Dad's take? My house is a liability, and if your house is your largest investment, you're in trouble. His logic was actually super simple. An asset is something that puts money into your pocket. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. And with the mortgage, taxes, insurance, repairs, your main home is constantly pulling cash out of your pocket. It's a radical thought, for sure, but it's absolutely central to his whole strategy.
So when you look at all this conflicting advice, you start to see the deeper truth here. The real difference between Rich Dad and Poor Dad wasn't how much money they made. It was how they thought. Kiyosaki basically argues that the most important financial battle you will ever fight is the one that's happening right between your ears.
Think about this one phrase, something we've all probably said or at least thought. I can't afford it. It's just a full stop, a statement of defeat. It's like a mental dead end. And for Poor Dad, saying this was just a habit. But Rich Dad, he literally forbade those words in his house. Instead, he insisted on this one tiny but incredibly powerful change. You turn the statement into a question. You don't say, I can't afford it. You ask,
how can I afford it? And that little shift, it changes everything. It turns that dead end into a starting line for a creative challenge.
It's really as simple as this. One phrase, I can't, just shuts your brain down. It's mental laziness. The other phrase, how can I, puts your brain to work. It's like a workout. Rich Dad really believed your mind was a muscle. The more you exercise it with these kinds of financial puzzles, the stronger and more powerful it gets.
And Rich Dad made another really important distinction. He said there's a huge difference between being broke and being poor. See, being broke is temporary. It's just a situation, a number in your bank account. But being poor, he said, that's eternal. It's a mindset. It's an identity you take on, built on that kind of I can't thinking, and that can last a lifetime.
And this really brings us to the core of it all. Poor Dad wasn't poor because of his paycheck. He made good money. He was poor because of his thoughts and his actions. By constantly telling himself things like, I'll never be rich, he was literally creating his own reality. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So you've got a young kid stuck between these two completely clashing philosophies. He had to make a choice. And this wasn't just any choice. It was a decision that was going to shape the entire rest of his life. And he made it when he was just 9 years old. He decided he was going to listen to and learn about money from his rich dad, the guy who dropped out of 8th grade, instead of his highly educated PhD father. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. At 9, he chose the risky, unproven path instead of the safe one that society and even his own family was telling him to take.
Later in his life, he often talked about that huge decision, and he framed it using the words of a famous poem, because it just perfectly captured the weight of that choice he made as a kid.
For him, choosing to follow Rich Dad's advice, well, that was his road less traveled. And he says that one single choice, that's what made all the difference. It put him on a financial journey that went against pretty much everything he was ever taught in a classroom.
So when you boil it all down, the book's biggest lesson is this. Money is fleeting. It comes and it goes. The one thing you have that's truly powerful is your mind, and financial education, that's what unlocks that power. It's what gives you control. It's what teaches you how to make money work for you so you don't have to spend your entire life working for it.
But you know, everything we've talked about so far, that's just the foundation. That's the mindset. Rich Dad's actual practical advice was built on 6 simple lessons that he taught over and over for 30 years. So that leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? What are those 6 lessons and how do you actually use them to build wealth?